Okay, so welcome to the open semifinals room 2 that was happening at 8 o'clock. We are running a bit behind, but the debate is going to start in about 7 minutes. The teams are now in prep session. The motion before us today is this House prefers a Europe without the European Union, the EU. In opening government, we have team USFQ A. In opening opposition, we have team Charities Leaders 1. In closing government, we have team MDG. And in closing opposition, we have team Obi Wan and Luke. And that's all I need to say. And then we're just going to wait for the debate to start in 6 minutes.
Sound testing yet again for the screen. And it makes me do a lot of things for the tournament. I hope he's happy. Is he happy? It was the test successful.
Just so the people online know again, the debate is starting in 2 minutes.
Hello everyone, that's fine. I believe we're missing USFQ A. Bye. Okay, so I think everyone's here now. So I'm gonna present myself and my panel. My name is Fernanda Crousilliat. I prefer gender pronouns are indifferent. I have no preference at all. So if my panelists could state their name and their preferred gender pronouns, I would greatly appreciate it.
I'm Ashit Dutta. My preferred gender pronouns are he and they.
Lekha Suki. My preferred pronouns are she, her.
Tshiamo Malatji, he, him.
Nyabuto Nyachio, I have no preferred gender pronoun, so I'm good.
All right. right, so now I'm going to ask the teams to tell me the order of the speakers and their preferred gender pronouns. So, opening government.
First is Angelo, and preferred pronouns is he.
All right, and second.
Then it's Sebastian, and his preferred pronoun is he as well.
All right, opening opposition.
My preferred pronouns are she, her, and my name is Lindo Guhle. I will be speaking first.
Jeremiah Sechi, I prefer he or him, and I'll be speaking second.
Thanks. Closing government.
Frank Banaman, I was speaking first, and I prefer him or him. Second, Domingo, he's speaking second. He also prefers him or he, and that's it.
Okay, and finally, closing opposition.
First, the speaker, Caesar, and second, the speaker, Matthias, both with on different pronouns or indifferent pronouns.
All right, thank you very much. Before we start, just to remind everyone that shames are prohibited, obviously, and that POI should be done in the chat unless the speaker states otherwise before their speech. And without further ado, well, I cannot take time because I have my phone like Discord in case my Wi-Fi fails. So if any of the panelists could take time, I would greatly appreciate it. Right, thank you very much. So without further ado, we call the Prime Minister to open this debate.
All right, before I begin, can everybody hear me okay? So I'm going to start in 3, 2, 1. Panel, I think the important thing here is to actually see where countries are in 3 scenarios. First, economically, second, politically, and third, in international relationships, right? So I think the European Union is actually very proud because they represent that they change the monetary politics of the whole country of the region. And I think this is very important because necessarily there's a Congress that determines the votes here. And whenever a country offers a change, for example, to change some monetary laws or to change something, I think there are hegemonic powers, for example, like Great Britain was, for example, like Spain, like France, like Germany. I think these hegemonic powers not only interfere within the decision and not only interfere within how a decision in monetary politics is made, but that necessarily makes it not just for countries that are small, for countries that have never had the power to speak up in these scenarios. I think this is necessarily unjust. Secondly, I think the reason why, for example, Britain left the European Union and why Spain wants to do the same is because there is an injustice in terms of how economics works. For example, whenever a country enters a recession or enters a crisis, that means that the whole European Union has to necessarily support this country, and that means that, for example, the whole monetary politics of every country in the European Union actually changes to that, and it means that, for example, the individual powers of each country is limited, not only in their growth, but also in how they necessarily work as an individual. This is very important because notice how, for example, Great Britain could have done really well on its own, but because they had to give up like a big portion of their money in terms of because Greece was in a recession or because Italy was in. I think that means that you don't have an autonomous unit as a country, and I think that is when you necessarily fail your citizens, not because you have a bad government, but because you're in this organization that's just necessarily bad. Secondly, I think this is necessary. I think opposition is going to tell you that it's okay to have it's okay that the individual powers of each country is limited because you can have like around, you can have these international relationships. I think even if they accept that, this is necessarily bad for two reasons. First, I think there exist other forms of constructions of organizations and of your unions that necessarily can respond to individual rights. Notice how, for example, the African Union had this, and notice, for example, a South American Union that was back also had this. I think this is important because when you necessarily respond to individual rights, it's going to be much better for the influence of an individual country. Secondly, even if there doesn't exist other forms, and even if we defend a Europe where every country is just individual, I think you can still be economically independent in the instance that you can still support each other and you can still have trade from each other. Why is this necessarily exclusive from our case? Because necessarily notice that when Britain went autonomous and left the European Union, notice how the European Union put actually sanctions on them. For example, that no other country could actually trade with them, or for example, that some citizens couldn't actually go into Great Britain because of all of this passport. This means that there is necessarily an injustice whenever you have a European Union, and it means that it's going to be much better when you can actually like support each other economically. For example, you can have another organization that gives higher taxes to like a country that ends in recession, but it doesn't necessarily have to sacrifice every country within them. Before I continue, a point from closing opposition.
Thank you. I'm sorry, but could you mechanize your arguments, giving us examples and data, please? Okay.
I think in the best case scenario for our side, I think necessarily when we have a Europe without European Union, we can have a couple of things. First, I think the countries can be independent by themselves, but they can still support each other. For example, economically, in the sense that we can still trade freely from one another, or we can still like have passports to go into. But I think the important part is to stop the monetary politics that actually happen with the European Union and to necessarily adjust it. Why is this important? Because I think you have more autonomy as an individual country, and I think not everything that the European Union claims is actually good. Third piece of analysis: international relationships. I think necessarily when the European Union, because it's so big and because it has such a power and influence, they create this narrative on every country. I think this is important because when they have to fight, for example, battles in the Middle East, for example, for human rights, I think that's when a piece of the economic portions actually affect each country, even if they don't agree with the initial standing. I think they still have to give, for example, a percentage in military action, or they have to give a percentage of the troops to deal with problems that aren't necessarily in their borders. I think this is important because we need autonomy as a country for two reasons. First, I think international relationships means that you can have, for example, better trade with other countries, but you can also be respected as an individual. I think necessarily you can only have this when you have political sovereignty. This means that, for example, as an image in a country, you can do whatever you want with your resources, and you can have political sovereignty in being influenced in some scenarios or not some scenarios. I think you can't have this whenever you have an organization that controls everything you do and controls, for example, if you support a narrative or if you don't support a narrative. This means that you don't have political sovereignty as an individual country, but you have it as a union of countries. This is necessarily bad because we don't want this in terms of, because as a country, you have this individual right to necessarily assert yourself and assert your dominance. But I think it's much more problematic whenever you have like these really big powers for example, that not only interfere in their monetary politics, but also interfere in anything that happens around with the European Union in terms of having more taxes, etc. I think you can have all the benefits, for example, being in another organization, but you can also have them being independently economically. I think this is going to be much better, not only for the countries, but for everybody around the world. Why is this? Because necessarily, for example, in terms of training and in terms of having visas in order to go to other countries, you can actually have this, well, necessarily whenever you don't have the European Union that actually admits all of this. Notice how we can still have, for example, countries without borders or countries that you can trade freely. There's not all of these taxes and all of these monetary politics that the European heavily import.
All right. Now we call the leader of the open the case for their hand.
Everyone. Okay, and everyone now I had to leave and come quickly. One person, so that's kind of a concern. Can anyone except Tshiamo or hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. I begin. Anyone hear me?
Yes, you can begin whenever you want.
Thank you. Now, in this debate from the opening opposition bench, we're going to prove two things. Firstly, that the existence of the EU is important for forming valuable responses where sovereign decisions would otherwise be less plausible. Secondly, that sovereignty is not undermined to a ridiculously harmful extent. That in mind, let's first begin with a couple of responses. So 3 points. The first point that we received from opening government is that the existence of the structure is unjust for smaller countries. So they give us an example where should a country experience recession, everyone has to adjust to this burden. And then they give us an example of Britain and how they would have otherwise done well outside of the structure. So the first response here is that the point behind the EU is collective benefit. That countries know this when they enter, when they consent to being a part of the structure. The response here is therefore that it is not a harm to say that countries share in the collective burden, but it is something that countries consented to, and it is inherently how the structure works. The second response, therefore, is that countries have the capacity to leave should they want to. So what they have to tell us is not that countries have to respond in a collective manner, but they have to tell us that it is specifically harmful for individuals to, I guess, stay in, it's specifically harmful for the structure to exist in its entirety, because at the end of the day, when a country does not benefit, they have the capacity to leave. That doesn't mean that the whole structure is bad. It just means that the structure doesn't work for that specific country. It's because collective benefit is the entire point. Second response, the second argument that they give us is that countries can be independent but still support each other, and that's a far more plausible alternative. We say that this is true. However, countries want relative advantage. For example, they want to trade with other countries where they know that they don't have to pay some sort of cost. There isn't some sort of cost, for example, in terms of tariffs. They want to know that they can have an easy flow of skills into their countries that wouldn't cost them as much. So yes, countries can support each other independently, but countries want some sort of comparative/relative advantage. And that's what being part of a big political and economic group means for these countries. So what they have to tell us is why countries don't deserve the independent capacity to choose how they want to form their alliance. Because if countries can support each other again independently, that's fine, but that doesn't say why this entire structure can't exist. The last thing that they tell us is on sovereignty and why it's valuable. The simple response here is that countries do not always act in the best of interest, and therefore it is somewhat beneficial to have a structure that's able to regulate decisions, or rather minimize the impact of decisions that aren't as valuable, which brings me into my positive matter. So the first point that I'm going to address is how the very existence of the EU as a structure is important for forming valuable responses where independent sovereign decisions would otherwise not be beneficial, specifically in Europe as a continent. Before I proceed, I will take the POI from Ochi.
No, this is a motion of different worlds. So in opposition world, you have this political pressure that the only system is the EU. In our world, we just have a world without the EU.
I mean, that's cool, but if you're going to prefer a world without the EU, you're inevitably going to have to make reference to status quo. And how I'm disproving your argument is by showing why status quo, where the EU does exist, is valuable. I don't know if I'm responding to your point well, but if I'm not, feel free to give me another POI. So again, why do we prefer a world where the EU does in fact exist? So the first argument, the purpose behind the EU, we have numerous benefits that exist, right? Numerous collective benefits, things like an ease in migration restrictions, things like trade advantages, where trade is far more easier for everyone within the specific area due to things like a common currency. We have a regional court that's able to make decisions that affect every member, right? So an example, when Adidas wanted to ban any other company, when a Italian company had a brand that had 3 stripes, and Adidas tried to patent that, the court was able to rule against that in order to enable more companies to produce products that had that kind of item. For example, with migration, we're able to have an organization that's able to dictate on countries how many individuals they can take, or rather to take individuals and set up a policy on how best they can respond to the migration concern. So we have all of these collective benefits. What this has meant, right, is that because we have all of these collective benefits, it means that countries have an interest in being in the relative advantage that exists in being a part of these structures. The reason why this is important is that where there's an objectively beneficial agenda that has been that comes up discussion, it means that it is important that there's a body that is able to ensure uniformity based on valuable ideals, right? So, for example, on ensuring accessible trade as above, as well as on helping migrants fleeing war-stricken countries to come in and establish themselves in the different countries. Especially where sovereign decisions would have otherwise meant that countries can reject, for example, taking migrants in, we say that it is beneficial to have a world where we can have a body that is able to use the benefits, that is able to ensure that there are objectively beneficial decisions that are taken, right? Because countries want the relative benefits of continuing to exist in the structure. So then the question becomes, what about the impact that this has on sovereignty? And here, we say that sovereignty isn't harmed to or rather limited to a ridiculous extent. One, we say often countries share the risk, right? Especially by existing in the structure. So, for example, when Italy had more migrants entering into its country, the EU was able to mandate other countries to take in some of the refugees coming into Europe coming into Italy at that particular time. So it's not that there's a significant burden that flows to one specific country undermining or ability to act independently. Secondly, say that the demands are relative to the strength of each country. So bigger countries, for example, will pay more tax relative to Greece, relative to Slovenia. And we say that that's something that also doesn't hamstring or cripple the country's economy in any way. However, then the question becomes, what happens to the countries that do fail? Countries like Greece. We need to understand that countries who've often failed in the structure did not fail because they entered, did not fail because of how the structure works, but because, especially when looking at Greece, they failed because they entered the structure even if they weren't capacitated to operate in it. So that's a bad decision on behalf of government and not the failure of the structure. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Now we call the Deputy Prime Minister of the government to close the case for their house.
Hi.
Hello? Yes?
Yep. So, 3, 2, 1. And how does a world without the European rights? It's important question here, along with the question how Europe looks at the European. Your side of the house from government, we're going to defend that we prefer a world and Europe, for instance, in the debate without the European Union. Note how the only responses that the opening opposition has to are okay. Firstly, there the point of they say the point of the European Union is to have collective benefits. We say yeah, and that countries gave like their contribution. We say okay, no. Like the small countries in Europe, the weakest countries in Europe did not let them consent. They just accept everything that the European Union imposed to them to belong to them because they faced in the past a severe economic and political crisis, and they needed the economic support. So they did not give consent, and now they have to stay there because it is the only alternative when you are concerned and before it's not consent at all. So so it's not like they do that; they just have to do. The thing is that they say this is the only way to support others to have things like the flow of skills or to have advantage over others. We say we understand perfectly how developing countries will be if they all organize geographic union. We say even with the rich countries, it is a completely different thing when a set of rich countries start to impose protectionist policies and they start to like take the decision in ways is very problematic for China. We are going to explain you. The thing is that we have to be comparative. The opposition have to defend the side where countries are not giving up on the European Union, and we defend how the European Union works right now. But what is the problem? If we can divide everything in three economy, politics, and international relations, there are a lot of problems. First, with respect to economics,
The thing is that when a small country faces economic crisis, they do not have agency to promote economic change. The world when a country faces economic crisis, they have the alternative to impose policies and fiscal policies. The European Union imposes conditions that makes it very difficult to the courts to decide on them. That is the key fact that probably is true that Greece did not have a crisis because of the European Union, but the truth is that they couldn't recover because of the European Union, and this is a fact. This is a thing that is happening. And the second thing is that the autonomy of the is highly problematic because what's happened in the European Union? If Germany prefers to do something different, that if they want to promote the change, and it is highly probable that they achieve this change within the European Union. If Liechtenstein or if Greece wants to do a change, then it's highly this happen. The thing is that the small amount of autonomy for each country is not proportional to the open it's happening because as a country we do not care about the collective benefits. We care about things that's happening in this is very problematic and that is the reason because of the countries having problems in the latest. With respect to politics, it's very important to understand that when country wants to make a decision on, it is highly improbable that when Britain, the UK wants to get out of the European Union, then a lot of conditions were imposed. Like, okay, you are not going to allow your workers to travel to Europe or to work in Europe. Okay, you're not going to have economic or commercial benefits, and a lot of things. Same happens with Spain when they face a highly problematic economic crisis. This is happening, and the countries are not the alternative to overcome this crisis. The countries do not have the autonomy to do, and inside the countries that you polarize between alternatives that do not belong to the reality. That is people and defending sides for the European Union, even if it's not what the country needs, because it's their only alternative. Apart for the closing opposition.
Yeah, your claim, it's merely descriptive. You're just telling us that these countries have no agency or no capacity or autonomy. You haven't explained why that is a bad thing or why is it so necessary for these countries to have their agency to apply policies in economics, for example.
The thing is that there is the only and the best alternative to overcome crisis. The thing is, if you do not have a monetary policy or a fiscal policy, you have to do the same as the whole European Union doing so, and it means further like very more crisis. It means that the small countries cannot manage their economy. They have to do everything the other countries are doing, and the key fact is that they do not have a turn to make deals with the countries outside the European Union because they cannot do so. They cannot look for countries outside Europe. They cannot look for alternatives in Asia. There are no alternatives, and they are constrained to accept conditions that the European Union are imposing on them because of this political union of this. So, with better because the countries are going for autonomy and they will be better off and they will have a high impact on the whole world.
All right. Thank you very much. Now we call the deputy leader of the opposition to close the debate in the opening half.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Great. Starting 3, 2, 1. Panel, The EU has so far been the most successful model for regional integration politically, economically, and socially. On our side, we'd like to keep it as it is. Note that the burden of proof on the government team is to firstly imagine how their world looks like in the most realistic sense. OG does not do that to any stretch. But secondly, we need to give a holistic assessment, right? And why the best alternative to our world is to have no EU. As against, on our side, its continued existence, the possibility of reformation, and the protection of its inherent qualities and values. In my constructive matter, I'm going to be giving you two main arguments: the political necessity of the EU and the economic necessity. But before that, a few responses. Firstly, from the government, their main argument is that there are some hegemonic powers that are going to trample upon the sovereignty of these other countries. Firstly, that is not true or true in all cases, because even though some countries have more influence, there are strict democratic procedures to arriving at decision making. But secondly, even if we have hegemonic powers that are big and they are influential and powerful, what happens is that in most instances, they absorb the economic risk of the failures of small economies like Greece, etc. So then it benefits these small countries to be part of the EU. But next, they argue that sovereignty is so important to these countries. Note that the biggest complaints that have come from the sovereignty being lacked by being part of the EU has come from bigger countries like UK, Italy, etc. But then in any case, we prove to you why that lack of sovereignty is not significant, and in many instances, the collective stake benefits all countries. Next, they argue that at the same time, it holds big countries back. Why is that not the case? Firstly, because these countries benefit from the free trade, because these countries like the UK, Germany, etc., are the most industrialized with the best of service. So they benefit from tourism, they benefit from the trade because they're the ones that have the most means of production. The small countries also benefit from bailouts and benefits. What they argue from their side is that, oh no, the EU is so strict, they impose these restrictions on them. Note, what would have been the alternative for a failing Greece? An alternative would have been to go to the IMF for funds. The IMF has proved more terrible with its conditionalities. But note that the IMF has less incentive to care about the destruction of Greece because it would not be affected as the EU would be. Because if Greece fails, people are going to migrate to the UK and Germany, and they are going to lose a valuable economic partner. The EU has a greater incentive to intervene in the most effective and beneficial way. Next, some clarification. They try to argue that, oh, without the EU, we can still have the Schengen area and free trade. Note, we need the EU for a common currency, migration, and all these things. Why? Note that all other regions that have achieved this, like ECOWAS in West Africa, always have a union. You need a union to enforce these arrangements, to provide a platform for arriving at these arrangements, and to ensure that they exist in the best possible sense. My two arguments. Firstly, on the political necessity. Note this, that firstly, we need the EU for globalization. The UN, the bigger globalizing power, is bureaucratic, inefficient, and has too much diversity. And hence, regional integration is a better indirect model for globalization. What are the impacts of leaving the EU out of this? The impact is that you have less models for other regions to copy when they want to promote regional integration. Secondly, you have a higher increase of nationalism. Note that many countries within the EU itself are countries that were historically nationalistic, like Italy and Germany. You have a return to that age of extreme nationalism when you remove the EU from existence. But next, you have a lesser capacity to engage with other international actors because then you have to engage primarily through the international bureaucratic elements of the UN. And also, you have less reaction to global issues like climate change. Note that the EU within itself has had a greater capacity to engage climate change as opposed to the failed Paris Climate Agreement. Next, a consolidation of liberal democratic values. The influential collective, that is the AU, has a greater capacity to promote liberal democratic values and the promotion of democracy around the world because it's a bigger, more influential actor. The impact of this is that without the EU, what you have is that there is an uncontrolled rise of China and Middle Eastern countries that are gaining more influence over Africa and other countries. What this means is that you lack bigger, more liberal, consolidated powers to engage that and to make sure that that power is decreased. On the economic necessity, firstly, we argue that the EU is founded on shared stake and collective bargaining power. The shared stake means that bigger countries have a responsibility to smaller countries, like what they did for Greece, because if they hadn't saved Greece, it should have affected the entire union. But next, aside that, what you have is that there is a reduced cost of living and a higher standard because of the common currency and other benefits. Next, collective bargaining, because of their large market population, they are better able to negotiate for better trading relations with China and the US. Internationally, what this means is that because of the improved liberalized trade within the EU, there's a reduced cost of production. What this means is that other countries can obtain goods and services from the EU at cheaper prices because their liberal market that has reduced barriers to trade has ensured that there is a greater promotion of trade at a reduced cost. But next, you have more competition because of their greater efficiency of producing goods and services, they become more competitive with regards to price and efficiency. That's able to provide more competitive options for global trading partners, which ensures greater growth in globalization and economic prosperity. Note that all of these benefits are ensured and protected by the European Union. They cannot argue for these benefits without proving the benefits of having the EU in power proud to.
All right, thank you very much. Now we call the member of the government to open the debate in the closing half.
Okay, guys, can you hear me? Hello? Okay, you can hear me. So I'll begin. Okay. Panel, can I go on? Okay, so I'm beginning in 3, 2, 1. The panel closing government is going to tell you. The first story we're going to tell you is the story of contradictions and logical flaws that happens of their three first chapters that can basically just leave if they want to. We realize that firstly, the policies of the EU make it extremely difficult for us, and these are not just easy. These are restrictive policies that make it very difficult for you to get proper legislation that allows you to go. Like what happened in Brexit and how we had to go through 3 prime ministers just for the people of Britain to get what they want. But secondly, realize that the fact that it is so restrictive to leave even forces nationalism within the state even more. Because when people feel choked down, when people feel that they can't get agency for themselves, that's where you spur nationalism and more political unrest in the system known as the EU. The second chapter to this story is the idea of sovereignty. Realize one,
that the socio-economic policies of the EU affect fiscal policies of these individual states to a very large extent. And it is even worse for these states who basically use the euro currency, as they can't even control their monetary policies. I'll explain why that is bad later on. But the third chapter in this story is the idea that the smaller states need to be bailed out, and there's no one to bail these smaller states when they fail. Realize that firstly, the reason why a lot of this way they do is because they have the ability to afford certain risky monetary policies within their own jurisdiction, because they feel they can still be bailed out by bigger states, i.e. what happened to Greece. We think it is a system that is set to fail and collapse on arrival. That handles open opposition. So what do we tell you from our side? We think that the financial crisis of 2008 and the immigration crisis of 2015 changed the people that are better as a contraption that is meant to keep them in chains. First, realize that with or without the benefits of the EU, there is a growing and undeniable political rights by citizens or citizens who are individuals of these states that exist within the citizens want to see their home states lead the geopolitical expression that we know as the European Union. So before we even discuss why these movements exist, we have to realize that if it actually does exist, if this movement is there, then individual states have to obey the political will of their people. So it looks more like a rise in nationalism. It looks more like far-right parties, like the Five-Star Movement of Italy, and what we see within Germany. If this actually exists, it then means that there is no already political will to stay within. It means that say it breaks up. Sorry guys, I'm really trying my best here. No political will to stay within. And notice that political will is the reason why the states joined the EU in the first place. So, also realize that as the panel, a world without that both case you get basically shows is obviously. Then they just tell you, oh, this bigger state panel is the biggest you leave. The EU basically is a job that wants, if we add to the current existence, then the states be branded all these basically cease to exist. Or basically the EU crumbles. Let's continue. Panel, two things also to share with you. Why is the autonomy of states in the EU very, very important? One, the EU was a protective mechanism, but now the world is changing. Realizing economics especially, the open opposition tell you that these states have free trade within them and it's beneficial. One, in most cases, the policies of the EU are severely agro-based to benefit smaller states that are also export-oriented and can basically farm and produce agricultural goods, unlike the service industry. But the price of these goods are especially high when you compare it with the prices from outside the EU, like Africa and food or China and tech. So it means that these states basically have to spend, bigger states have to spend money funding export-oriented states so they can then produce goods, and then we have the quote-unquote free trade at higher prices that they would otherwise have gotten from the outside due to specialization that now exists outside of the EU with African food, China, and tech. But secondly, also realize that the monetary policy of the EU purposely keeps the currency weaker to benefit export-oriented states so that the ability to sell your goods at a better price is something that they obviously benefit from. Before I go on, I'll take a POI from closing. Not hearing anything, guys. Closing. Okay, I'll just go on.
Please.
Okay, yeah, go on. Go on.
Yeah, you're criticizing, and you can criticize all you want, the European Union, but you haven't shown how comparatively this is better in your world. You haven't shown any mechanism that's going to let currency be better in your side of the house. So I believe that you're only completing or satisfying half of your burden of proof.
Okay. So, final, second side, and this is why we definitely win this debate. Realize that there is a current trade and power tussle going on between the US going on between China. This nuance we give you of today's world is bigger than just the consolidation versus individualism argument you get. This speaks specifically to what currently happens now. So the power trade talks that exist between the US, China, and a little bit of Russia are something that the EU is unable to tap in and benefit from, right? Because we believe that states that have taken a side, i.e. either siding China or siding the US, have the ability to gain certain numerous benefits, like the Belt and Road Initiative that benefits a lot of African states because of a clear side they take of debt erasure like happened in 2009. We think that the EU cannot allow it to tap in and benefit from this tussle. Why? Because one, the bureaucracy of the EU and how policies have to go through member states, the EU Parliament, and the EU Commission makes it such that it is difficult to even get make political and economic sides within the EU. But secondly, the existence of opposing views then means that it is difficult to go through these discussions and actually get a clear side of the world's economy that you want to side with. But thirdly, the majority view of states, the majority voting that a lot of states like France, Italy, Spain, and Germany have, is that even if smaller states wanted a clear path to this, you cannot get that because you can easily veto such discussions. It therefore means that the benefits we should be getting from a lot of economies outside the world, the lower prices we should be getting for goods from other countries outside of the EU are things that are no longer available. It is better the EU leaves. Remember, if all big states are suffering and all big states leave, then it is very clear and it is very apparent that EU as an existence crumbles. Why is that analysis very important? Because majority of the problems explained by the entire opposition bench are problems that show you why a lot of big states suffer within the EU, how they have to fund bailouts most of the time, and also fund a lot of production so that they can get goods at free trade, quote unquote, within the state or within the Eurozone. At any point where these people suffer and they leave, it means those bailouts, those fundings are no longer available, so the EU basically crumbles. We are very glad to win from closing government.
All right, thank you very much. Now we call the member of the opposition.
Okay, let's test some audio. Do you listen to me well? Yes?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, I'm going to close the window because my neighbor's dog is attempting against my discourse. So, because he's against the European Union. Give me a second. Okay. So let me put my timer. We'll begin in 3, 2, 1, go. Well, let's talk about all the issues related to opening and closing, and we're going to explain you why what they're proposing is a really bad idea, because they are not talking about how the European Union actually works. First, in the first government, we heard that we have a loss, the smaller countries or all countries have a loss of sovereignty, of sovereign decisions, because they could not participate in the EU decisions and the policies that they apply. That is not true. That is why we have an European Parliament, and that is why we have European democratic elections, where all the people in the EU can vote. And this is important because that is how the European Union have policies. So yeah, the countries still have decision. We believe the problem with the first government at this point is that they don't know how the European Union works. So let's make a side to that. Second of all, they tell us about how the smaller countries are being oppressed by bigger countries, and this relates with the arguments that closing government gave us. They say that we are being, as a smaller countries, in a worse position in terms of handling currency, in terms of handling the prices of goods, and in the terms of dealing with trade agreements. So let's take a pause for a minute, and this is our first extension, and it's going to cover the most important points of the government. Let's think, how does the economy world works today? If we don't have a European Union, so smaller countries like, I don't know, Luxembourg, Lithuania, Ireland, Hungary, Greece, Estonia, Finland, or other countries would like to engage with international trade or in trade agreements in two positions. First, where they are alone, or secondly, when they are in other groups or other organizations. So in the first, they will have to engage in trade agreements against other blocs that are really, really powerful. So you'll have to see Hungary, for example, or Greece dealing with BRICS. Okay, we're talking about the bloc that deals with Brazil, that deals with South Africa, that deals with Russia, that deals with India. They will have to do it alone against United States. They will have to do it alone against other organizations. So we believe that their position in the European Union is better, like they say, stronger together, because they will not have a stronger position against those blocs in the negotiation of trade deals and all the arguments that have given by the closing government. So that is one scenario. And the other scenario is that they join another organization. And here's the point. If you join another organization, you're going to have to face another greater countries in that organization, and you're going to face the same problems that you have all this time against the European Union. And that is the greater problem that governments have. They are not being comparative because they are not seeing any mechanism how the world will work if the European Union didn't exist. They believe that they only had to do was to criticize the European Union, that obviously is going to have some defects. Obviously, there is going to be some flaws, but they are not making a comparative case. So, in all this extension, this is really strong to face all the arguments that has given by the government. Second of all, let's think about how Europe has worked before the European Union. We're talking about a continent that they only knew how to resolve issues by war. Let's think in Europe before the European Union. We're talking about great wars in all the periods of history. And this is important. The European Union works as a peace forum because they teach Europe to solve their problems diplomatically, because of bureaucracy, because of trade agreements, because they depend each other, because it was not easy to declare war, because you're going to have to deal with a lot of countries then. So what does this tell us? That the European Union has been a strong, it has been a force for peace in one of the most belligerent countries that engages with one of the most important burden of proof, in which world people live better. And European Union has brought peace in a continent that was always in war. Third, also important, we have to remember what are the rules that the European Union gives you to have agreements with the European Union. And that is the policy that the EU neighborhood policy negotiations. If you want to have agreements with the European Union, your country has to fulfill democratic standards. They have to fulfill humanitarian standards. So if you want to enter this huge market, this huge unique market in the world, you have to fulfill issues with human rights. You have to fulfill democratic issues. You have to fulfill better conditions for your people. Why this is important? Because because the European Union has encouraging other countries the unique market. Why this is better? Why this is important? Because we have a better world where when you enforce the human rights discourse, when you empower the better conditions of life of the people that is outside the European Union. So yes, this is an important extension because it explains you how the world is better with an European Union. So we have told you how the European Union is an excellent response to the strength of smaller countries in the reality, if there is no European Union, countries will be by themselves negotiating with other blocs like BRICS or like South American bloc or like Eastern Asia blocks. Or if they do it in other organizations, they will have the same problem in the European Union. This means that they will have to be dealing with other stronger countries that will have the same problems that the government gives. There is no comparative case, neither in opening government, neither in closing government. We as opposition are winning this debate, opening and closing. Thank you very much. Proud to oppose.
Thank you very much. Now we call the whip of the opposition of the government to close the case for the government.
Guys, am I loud and clear? Am I loud and clear? Okay.
Yep. All right, so
Can you guys hear me?
okay, so the panel is gonna, right. Maybe if you could do it too, because it's breaking a little bit, that would be helpful.
Should I reposition myself or I'm clear?
Now you're clear. It was breaking a little bit.
Okay. Please indicate where my speech is breaking so that pause. Can I start? Okay. Starting in 3. Oh, wait. I start.
Yep.
Okay. Starting in 3, 1. No. To understand something. The reason why closing government wins today's debate is because we are the only thing that brings you the social reality of what the EU is. This debate does not happen in space. This debate is about the social reality of what's happening within the European Union right now. The problem with the entire case is that their entire case is premised on an idealistic world on what the EU is supposed to be. But then that is not what the EU is, and that's why they lose today's debate. What were the things which closing government tells you which makes us win today's debate? We tell you that the reason why our world would be better is because of the individual states in which these guys would closing opposition engage that by telling you that when these guys join these groups or make trade, smaller countries would suffer. Notice that this debate is not just about smaller countries, but also about bigger countries. And then the reason why smaller countries will not suffer is because of the problematic responses we get from closing opposition. Notice, that trade deals is not premised on how big a country is. Trade deals is premised on intrinsic ability of states to be better. So let me give you 2 case studies, right? First off, Singapore and Cuba are very small states, but Singapore and Cuba have very good trade deals. It means that if you are not able to trade well or make good trade agreements, it's not necessarily premised on you being weak or you joining a bigger body, but it is premised on you being able to have intrinsic systems that work better for you. Cuba and Singapore have a better system, and that's why even though they are small states, they are better. The relevance of this rebuttal shows you that as our world still works, states are individual. But then secondly, on bilateral relations are premised on individual utility. What that means is that these states can still get all the benefits they want within the EU. But then the problem or the reason why the EU is worse off is because the kind of economic and fiscal policies that are rolled out are ones which largely harm these sides. Then what are the extensions we told you from closing government? First of all, we told you about how there's a disproportionate economic policy
which don't deal with the specific. This is important one of this because the EU is an economic body. It means that if the economic mandate which it possesses fails, then there's no reason why we should prefer to exist within the EU. What did we tell you about that? We told you that because of the specifics of individual states, the kind of blanket like economic policies which are channeled out are ones which harm both big states and small states. The reason why panel
Yeah, it seems that the speaker has stopped. Yeah, if you could please try and say something.
I have heard. Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Do I restart or do I continue?
How much time has passed? Over a minute, right?
Please, what's my time right now? 2:40. Okay, so I'm continuing. Where I don't know where you guys head up to. So I don't know where.
We actually heard up to like you were talking about disproportionate economic policies and why they were bad for like the countries in general.
Okay. I'm continuing now. I hope I'm loud and clear.
Yes, you are.
Okay. Tshiamo, can I continue? Timing. Okay. 3, 2, 1. First of all, Muslim government talks about the disproportionate economic policies that exist. Those know that the problem with the EU is that the economic policies they roll out is one which is premised on them trying to achieve a form of economic autarky. What we mean by economic autarky is that a state is trying to be able to provide all the things within that system. So the EU, for instance, is trying to provide all the things possible. The problem with this is that it leads to production of things at a higher cost. So agricultural products can be achieved from Africa at a much lower cost. But then because the EU is investing so much money in agriculture, we still get the production of agriculture at higher cost. It means that this is an economic blow to a lot of states, not just small states, but big states also. And that's a very big problem. But then the second thing we told you about is about the currency and why the currency is a problem. Notice how the currency problems of the EU harms both big states and small states. How does it harm big states? Because its disproportionate interest rate harms how fast and slow growing economies. So fast growing economies like the UK and Germany are harmed by these interest rates. But then slow growing economies like Greece and Italy are also harmed by these same interest rates. What that means is that in a world in which you do not have individual autonomy over your currency, it largely harms how you pronounce monetary policy, and that necessarily harms you economically. That's the second economic analogy you then in a world in which it's extremely difficult for people to opt out of the EU, people are forced to get more nationalistic in nature. So we think this in itself is extremely harmful. But then, can I be heard?
Yes, continue.
Yes. Okay. So panel, notice how the rise of nationalism means that the kind of political will that even existed for the creation of the EU in the first place, which is an informant of sovereignty, is broken. Notice how the reason why people joined the EU was because of the political will by people within the states to join. At the point in time where that political will is degrading because of the rise of nationalism and how difficult it is for people to opt out of the EU, that in itself means that told you from closing government is about how there are shared shocks of a failing economy, so big states still suffer. Now on immigration, notice how the immigration issue is an extremely important issue because it comes the political, economic, and social status of every single state. Hello, the problem with opening opposition is that they say immigration is such a beautiful thing. But then in our world currently, people cannot have the autonomy to say that they do not want migrants within their state because migration laws are an important part of the EU. It means that states don't have the autonomy to opt out of immigration, especially as I've shown you how immigration largely harms the political and economic and social aspects of these states. These states need the autonomy. Prefer world in which there's no EU, so that these states have the autonomy to be able to access themselves. But then we also told you about how our alternative is better. Our alternative is better because of control of fiscal and monetary policy, because of the freedom to freely negotiate economic deals, but entirely because we control migration. There are rebuttals to OO and why they are ours. Because OO tells us that in their world there's collective bargaining. But then collective bargaining is harmful in their world because there are terrible policies within the EU. But then they also tell us that there's competition, but in their world there's reduced competition. Also notice how they say that countries have a capacity to leave, but then they make it difficult for them to leave. They say there's a formation of collective valuable response. Our world still have that ability for the collection of valuable responses. So notice how in our world we still have nations have to the world. It means that our world still has an opt-out for smaller nations. But in this panel, the social reality of the EU is that things are extremely bad. The EU has failed in its mandate and prefer a world in which these individual states are able to take their own bilateral relations. And the reason why this in the first place proud to propose.
All right, thank you very much. Now we call the whip of the opposition to close this debate.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Yes. Perfect. Let me set my timer real quick. Just want to take a few seconds to thank you all. Please, Bannerman, mute your microphone, please, but it doesn't interfere. Yeah, because I hear echo on my headphones. So please mute so that I can talk, please. Now I'll just mute it manually from my computer. Okay, whenever you tell me, I can start.
All right, whenever you want.
Okay. On the count of 3, 2, 1. Panel, just notice how there are two main questions in this debate, and we believe that closing opposition has been the only team that has responded to both questions in the best possible way. Firstly, I just want to address that this debate is not about criticizing European Union from government side. It's not about telling us how horrible or how segregates or how it discriminates small countries or how it prohibited big countries to further develop. That is not the question of the debate. The burden to government was not only to explain and criticize the UE, but to actually try to draw how would the world look like without UE and explain how that would be a better world. And for opposition side, it wasn't about only talking good things about UE, but it was also about drawing the world without UE and explaining how there's more harms than benefits in that world. We believe that we contested both of those questions really proud to oppose. Okay, let's address some rebuttal and comparative points right here. Okay, if you want to waste your POI on your first minute, go ahead, Angelo, OG.
Okay, so we proposed to you an economic collaboration between countries
and that autonomy is important because countries can solve their own problems and not depend on an organization that fails. Can you compare?
Okay, yeah, sure. Let's do that right away. Just notice two things right here. That first, no point as to why the economic metric is the most important one in this debate. I believe that Cesar already spoke to you about how EU provided peace in the continent by 3 different mechanisms. We talked about economic dependence between these countries, we talk about diplomacy, and we talk about agreement. I believe that even if you win the clash of economics, we have provided with the EU continent, we believe that that is the most important impact, and we believe that even if you win that clash, we're still winning the debate. But now, you're not winning that clash either. Let me explain why. Because the only thing that you told us is that it would be better in your side of the house because now, currently with EU, they have no agency to apply like fiscal policies or monetary policies. Yeah, as long as how there's no mechanism as to why autonomy is good in and of itself. He just said it would be better because they can solve their problems by their own without depending on an organization. He didn't provide any reason as to why they have the tools or the mechanisms to solve their problems, but actually we did with our first extension. We already rebut that point. Why? Because Cesar told you that small countries are unlikely to engage with international trade in your side of the house, because he told you that against blocks they're going to be competing, like Greece is going to be competing against different competitive blocks, against the United States, against different countries, against the African Union, but also they're going to, but you also presented a weird counterfactual, right? Like opening governments that literally that they could join a different kind of organization, like for example, African Union, right? Like it was really weird because they were against countries, small countries, depending on bigger countries, but then he said we can have different forms of organization. Firstly, he didn't explain how this different forms of organization would work. But secondly, if these forms of organizations are organizations at all, then the same harms that you present are going to still happen in your side of the house. Just notice how this principle as how it is this unfair for small countries already is out of this debate, because we already explained why small countries are better in our side, because they can be between our organizations that support them, they can be within our organization that lets us be stronger together, because it is easier to bargain against blocks when we are also an economic powerful bloc such as EU. We believe that that clash is also for closing opposition. Bannerman. Bannerman, your point. 3, 2, 1. All right, so sorry, no, he didn't speak. Okay, so now what happens here? Just notice how closing government makes. Okay, Bannerman, go ahead, please, quick.
Yes, so the debate is about whether we prefer the EU or not. Closing governments have shown you the systemic failures of the EU. We also show you how individuals have succeeded in the past, they can still succeed. Engage our systemic engagement on how individuals can still succeed.
Okay, about the first thing, he says that closing government proved all the fails of EU. Notice how he just said like Euro has failed, but this is not true. And just notice this rebuttal because it's extremely important. Euro generates incentives to be responsible. Why is this? Because now countries depend on the economy of other countries, so therefore there's an incentive like to not spend a lot of money or to not uncontrolled investment, for example. But also, and this is important because this directly responds closing government's point, it punishes irresponsible economies, aka Spain, aka Greece. So it's not that Euro failed, but it's that Spain failed, that Greece failed, because they spent and they wasted stupid amounts of money. So don't blame on the EU the fact that 2 states were really irresponsible with their economies, because that is not to blame on EU. So all your extension there is completely irrelevant. But then you told us that trade is not based whether or not the country is big or not. I think that directly affects all of government case, because literally you said that like the smaller countries are weaker in your side, like they are weaker in our side of the house because they cannot trade. But then you say that how big or how small the country it is, it doesn't affect the economy. So we believe that there's a contradiction there. But then you told us that trade is based on abilities, and you give us 2 really weird examples. You said Singapore. Singapore is not an example here. It's a fallacy, a false analogy. just for a simple reason, because Singapore has like really good luck with different trades that led them like only in the latter years to have a better economy. No reason as to why this model is going to replicate on countries like Greece. No reason as to why this is going to replicate in countries like Hungary. But secondly, you told us Cuba. This is simply an ugly lie. Cuba doesn't have really good trade relationships. Cuba has been blocked for several years by the United States, so that is just simply not true. No mechanism as to why that was going to generate a general rule to all the different countries in Europe. So just notice how we were the only team, and just notice this, the second extension of CICERE was the most important when we told you and we proved that European Union has brought on to peace, economic independency, diplomacy, agreements, rules between the EU, and the fact that it has led countries to find a democratic way of solving problems with things like European Parliament, and we believe that that's the most important impact in this debate. We're really proud to oppose.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone, for this debate. It was a really nice debate. And now the panel and I are gonna go deliberate. I'm not sure when you're gonna get the results, but good luck to everyone.
And thank you everybody for watching online with me. I hope you had a great time. I certainly enjoyed the debate. And I'll see you guys at the finals sometime tomorrow. Good luck to everybody for breaking for the semifinals.